$1.2 billion. Gone. The investor already closing his briefcase. Already standing. Already done with every single person in that room. She screamed down the hallway, desperate, humiliated, out of options, nothing. Then the wrong person stepped forward. No degree, no title, no business card, just a worn uniform, a broken sold shoe, and 4 languages nobody knew she spoke. The investor stopped walking, turned around, sat back down. And the most powerful people in that building watched a woman who cleaned their rooms save everything they almost destroyed. The hallway smelled like money, that mix of fresh flowers, and something underneath it all that said you belong here. Or it said the opposite, depending on who you were. Diana's heels said she belonged. Click, click, hard and fast on the marble floor. The kind of sound that makes people steps aside without knowing why. She was moving at the pace of someone who has run out of options, but hasn't admitted it yet. Phone pressed to her ear. Other hand pulling at the collar of her blazer the way people pull at things when their body is registering panic before their mind catches up. Does anyone here speak Chinese? Nobody answered. Anyone? Still nothing. She spun around, looked at the front desk, looked at the concierge, looked at the 2 bellhops standing near the elevator bank who had suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. Nobody. Because nobody spoke Chinese. Because this was a hotel worth $1.2 billion and not one single person in guest relations had thought to ask that question until right now. Until the moment Wei Jianming was already in there, already unhappy, already reaching for his briefcase with the slowness of a man who has made us his mind and is simply waiting for the correct moment to say so out loud. Diana pressed her phone against her ear. Voicemail, another number, voicemail again. The deal was dying right now down the hall, behind frosted glass, and Diana Holt, Director of Guest Relations at the Meridian Grand Hotel, Chicago, was standing in a corridor holding a phone that nobody was answering. Cut back. 6 hours earlier, the linen cart made a sound like a question mark. That soft, persistent squeak every time the left wheel hit a certain patch of carpet on the 14th floor. Zara Coleman had reported it twice. Maintenance had looked at it twice. The wheel still squeaked every single shift. She had stopped long ago, approximately 4 months ago. 7:04 in the morning. Cart loaded, rooms assigned, coffee funnel still warm in the thermos clipped to the side of her apron. Zara pulled her list from her pocket, checked the first room number, and started down the hall. She moved the way people move when they've done something 10,000 times. No wasted steps, no hesitation. Just the body knowing where it's going before the mind finishes the thought. Room 1401. Check out. She knocked twice, waited, knock again, opened the door. The room was empty in the way hotel rooms are empty after someone has just left them. Still warm, a little wrinkled around the edges. Personal in all the wrong places. A half-empty water glass on the nightstand. A crumpled receipt near the trash can that didn't quite make it in. Zara started at the window and worked her way back. This was how Ruth had taught her to clean a room. Not from a training manual. From a woman who had cleaned offices on Baltimore for 28 years and who understood, the way only people who have done physical work for a long time understand, that there is a right order to everything. Start at the point farthest from the door. Work your way out. Don't cross your own clean path. Ruth had explained this when Zara was 7 years old. She had been explaining things like that her whole life. Past tense now. Ruth Coleman was a woman who did not take up space. That's how Zara always thought about her. Not because Ruth was small. She wasn't. She was tall and broad-shouldered, and had hands that looked like they had spent 30 years doing exactly what they had spent 30 years doing. But she had this quality, this ability to be in a room without demanding anything from it, without needing it to register that she was there. She cleaned offices downtown, same buildings every night, same floors, same trash cans. Same desks belonging to people who never left her a note and never said thank you and probably never thought about her at all between 6 in the evening when they left and 8 in the morning when they came back to a clean space and assumed it had somehow cleaned itself. Ruth didn't talk about that. What Ruth talked about was language, her belief in it, her absolute unshakable belief that language was the most powerful thing a person could own. Because everything else could be taken. The apartment could be taken. The job could be taken. The money, if there ever was much money, could be taken. But language. Nobody could reach inside your head and pull that out. Language is the one thing nobody can repossess, she told Zara. over dinner, during homework, while braiding her hair before bed at fingers moving through sections of hair the way she moved through everything. Steady, practiced, sure of herself, not the landlord, not the boss, nobody. Zara believed her. She believed her the way children believe things when the person saying them is the most solid thing in their world. And Ruth was solid. Ruth was the most solid thing Zara had. Her mother had left when Zara was 4. Her father had never quite arrived. It was Ruth who showed up at school plays and made sure there was food in the refrigerator and stayed up past midnight on the nights when Zara had a test she was scared about. Not helping with the test, just being awake, just being there. Ruth died on a Thursday in November when Zara was 19 years old. Cardiac arrest. Fast. The doctor said she probably didn't feel much. Zara was at work when it happened. Cleaning rooms at a hotel on the north side. Smaller place, less marble. She got the call at 2:17 in the afternoon and stood in the hallway outside room 612 for a long time before she understood what the words meant. The weeks that followed were the blur that only makes sense in retrospect. Funeral, forms. The matter of the apartment which Zara could not afford alone and moved out of within 30 days. She took 2 bags. A box of Ruth's books, and one more thing, Ruth's wallet, which contained $14, a grocery store loyalty card, and a library card, still active. Zara found out about the library the way you find out about most things when you have no money and no plan. She just walked in. It was a Tuesday. She had finished a shift and the bus she needed wouldn't come for 40 minutes, and the library was right there. So she went in, sat down, stayed for 3 hours. She came back the next day, and the day after that. The library became the shape of her evenings, after work, before sleep. The language section, specifically. She didn't plan it. She just kept ending up there, in front of those shelves, running her finger along the spines of books in languages she couldn't read yet. She started with Mandarin because of something that had happened at the hotel. A family, tourists, a mother and a father and 2 small kids who had gotten turned around trying to find the restaurant on the 2nd floor. They were asking everyone. Front desk, the concierge, 3 different people in the lobby. Nobody understood them, and Zara had watched them standing there in the middle of all that marble and flowers, completely lost. Not because they were in the wrong place, just because nobody spoke their language. She thought, I want to understand them. Not as a project, not as a strategy, just a simple want. I want to know what they're saying. So she started learning. Library books first. Then free courses online, then podcasts, then a notebook, then another notebook, then a system. A very specific discipline that involved 4 swords and collar coding of crown and vocabulary lists that ran margin to margin across every page. Mandarin first, then French, because of a book Ruth had left behind. A small paperback with a cracked spine and Ruth's handwriting in the margins. Notes in English and Creole. Zara read those notes more carefully than the text itself. Portuguese came from a woman she worked with, a Daisy, who spoke at home and sometimes slipped into it during lunch break without noticing. Zaza started asking her to say things twice, then asked what things meant, then started trying to repeat them back. A Daisy thought it was funny at first, then she thought it was something else entirely. Arabic came from a night school program. 8 months of classes, 2 nights a week. Sitting in a classroom that smelled like dry erase markers next to people who were there for all kinds of reasons. Zara was there because the section on Arabic at the library had run out of things she could absorb just by reading. She needed to hear it, needed someone to correct her when she was wrong. The program lost its funding and shut down after 8 months. She kept going anyway, on her own. Notebook was the proof of all of it, a battered composition book with a cover that had been bent and flattened so many times it had given up trying to hold its shape. Inside 4 languages, sometimes all 4 on the same page. Grammar rules stacked on vocabulary lists, stacked on sample sentences, stacked on corrections she'd made to her own previous correction. The rubber band holding it together had been replaced twice. If you saw it sitting on a table in the break room at the Meridian Grand Hotel, you would not look twice. That was the thing about Invisible. It worked both ways. The Meridian Grand was a different hotel than the one where Zara had started. More marble, more flowers, more of that smell. It had been open for 40 years and had hosted the kind of events that showed up in the business section of newspapers. Conventions, corporate retreats, the occasional high-level gathering for people whose names appeared in its rooms Zara was not assigned to enter. She had been working there for 3 years. She was good at her job. She knew which rooms ran cold and which ones ran hot. She knew the ice machine on the 11th floor was slower than the one on the 8th. She knew that if a guest needed extra towels after 10 p.m., the supply closet near the service elevator was faster than calling down to housekeeping. She knew the names of the other people on her floor and the schedule of the breakfast cart and the exact number of steps from the elevator to the last room in the East Wing. She was also good at a lot of other things that nobody at the Meridian Grand knew about. About a year into the job, she had filled out an application for a front desk position. Not impulsively. She had thought about it for a long time, had written the cover letter 4 times, had printed it on paper from the library printer because her own printer had died and she hadn't replaced it, had turned it in to the HR office on a Wednesday afternoon and gone back to work and not mentioned it to anyone. 2 weeks later, a response arrived, not an interview, not even a call, a letter, with the position listed at the top and a single paragraph explaining that the role required a professional communication background, and in the margin, handwritten, not typed. Handwritten in blue ink, a almost careful cursive, no professional communication background. Zara had read it twice, then folded it, carefully, horizontally, and then vertically until it was a small, tight square. She opened her notebook to page 34 and pressed it flat against the page and closed the notebook over it. She hadn't thrown it away. She didn't know exactly why, but it was still there, still on page 34. Every time she opened the notebook, she could feel the slight thickness of it under the paper. The handwriting was Diana Holt's. The Chinese delegation arrived at the Meridian Grand at 9:20 in the morning. They were not supposed to arrive until noon. This happened sometimes with international travel. Schedules that made perfect sense in one tourism zone arriving completely scrambled in another. Zara had seen it before. Groups showing up early, needing rooms early, needing conference spaces set up for the hotel was ready for them. She was in the service corridor on the 9th floor when she heard them come through the lobby. Not the people themselves, just the shift in energy. The way the front desk staff's voices changed pitch. That mix of surprise and the particular scrambling of people who are not prepared for something they should have prepared for. She kept working. At 9:40, she was in the linen supply room adjacent to the main corridor, doing a routine inventory check, counting pillowcases, folding towels that had come back from laundry slightly misaligned. Work that looked like nothing from the outside, but that mattered because a room where the towels are badly folded is a room that doesn't feel right, and guests feel that even when they can't name it. The fire-hard door at the end of the corridor was propped up with a door stop. She hadn't propped it. Someone else had. Probably the maintenance worker who'd been servicing the HVAC unit that morning. Through the gap, she could hear voices. At first, she wasn't paying attention. Voices in the hallway were part of the background, like the HVAC hum and the distant elevator chime and the wheel of her cart that still needed fixing. Then she started listening, because one of the voices was speaking Mandarin. Not casual Mandarin, not tourist Mandarin. The voice was sharp, precise, using vocabulary you use when you're serious. When you're talking about something that matters, when you expect to be understood. She recognized of the register before she fully registered the word. It was the cadence of someone who is not happy. Someone making a point. Someone's expecting precision in return. She set down the pillowcase. The voice belonged to a man she would come to know as Wei Jianming, 64 years old. He was asking a question, a specific question about the governance clause in the acquisition agreement, about who would retain decision-making authority after the deal closed, about the exact language, shared oversight versus transferred control. Not a small question, the one everything else would turn on. Then the other voice, the interpreter, a man named Thomas Ekliang, whose name she didn't know yet. She just knew his voice, and she knew within 4 seconds of him to speak that something was badly wrong. Because what came out of Thomas Liang's mouth was not what Wei Jianming had said. What he translated was something about timeline flexibility, a general comment about scheduling, something vague and soft and completely disconnected from the sharp, specific concern that had just been raised in the room. Zara's hands went still. She was holding a folded towel against her chest. She didn't notice that. She was listening, really listening, not for the surface of the words, for the gap between what was said and what was heard. She understood every word Wei Jianming had said. She understood every word Thomas Lang had translated. Those two things were not the same conversation. She stood there for a moment, the towel pressed against her chest, the fire door open a few inches, the voices on the other side continuing. Wei Jianming raising something else now. Thomas responding with something else that approximated but did not capture it. She looked down at her wrist. The bracelet was there. It was always there. Small glass beads in a pale green that looked almost like jade but wasn't. Ruth had given it to her years ago at Christmas. She'd been apologetic when she handed it over. It's not jade, baby, but it's yours. Zara had never taken it off. She thought, I could say something. Then she thought, who would listen? She picked up the towel, placed it on a stack, turned the cart, moved down the corridor in the opposite direction. The fire door swung shut behind her. The voices disappeared. At 11:15 in the morning, Zara was on the 17th floor, room 1714. A checkout with same-day relet, which meant she needed it turned over by 1 o'clock. She knocked twice, heard nothing, used her key card. The room was in decent shape. A guest who travels neat. Everything in approximately the right place. On the desk, a room service tray from the previous evening, and beside it, a note. Not a typed note, not a printout. A handwritten note on hotel stationery in ink in French. She picked it up. Read it. The guest had a severe feather allergy. Had discovered upon arrival that the pillows contained down. Had been uncomfortable all night. Was requesting a full replacement with synthetic fill. He had written the note with the formal courtesies of someone who believes in saying please even when frustrated. He signed it, and below his signature, in smaller writing, avec mes remerciements, with my thanks. Zara set the note back down, opened the desk drawer, took out a piece of hotel stationery and a pen. She wrote back, in French, 90 seconds. She told us she understood completely, that she was deeply sorry for the discomfort, that she had already located hypoallergenic pillows from the reserve supply, and they would be in place before his return. That if there was anything else he needed during his stay, she hoped he would feel completely comfortable asking. She wrote in French the way she did everything with language. Precisely, with attention to the small things. The accent marks in the right places. The formals register the note called for. She signed it with her employee number, not her name, just the number. Then she got the hypoallergenic pillows and arranged them on the bed and placed the note on top of the larger pillow and stepped back and looked at the room. Good. She picked up her cart and moved toward the door. She didn't see Peggy Shaw in the hallway, but Peggy Shaw saw her. Peggy Shaw had been at the Meridian Grand for 24 years. She had seen a lot in 24 years. She had seen a vice president of a large company cry in the lobby over a phone call. She had seen wedding parties arrive and then not have weddings. She had seen the daily dramas that accumulate when you spend enough years paying close attention to a place. She was 60 years old, white hair cut short. She had a way of standing behind the front desk that suggested she was not just waiting for something to happen, but actively watching for it. Not suspiciously, just attentively. The posture of someone who has been paying attention for so long it has become structural. She had been walking past room 1714 at the exact moment Zara was writing at the desk. She had glanced in. The door was open, and there was movement inside. Just the automatic response of someone whose job involves noticing what's happening in the rooms. She had seen Zara standing at the desk, writing something, in French. Peggy stopped moving. She stood in the hallway for 3 full seconds, watching Zara finish the note, cap the pen, move to the closet. Then she walked away. She didn't say anything, but she was thinking hard about what she had just seen and what it meant, and whether it meant what she thought it meant. Lunch in the employee break room was not a particularly inspiring experience. One long table, plastic chairs, a microwave that ran slow, a bulletin board with scheduling updates and a reminder about the towel folding protocol posted 3 weeks ago that most people hadn't read. Zara sat at the far end of the table. This was not unusual. She generally ate alone, not because she was unfriendly, more because lunch was the only 40 minutes in shifts where she could put her earbuds in without feeling like she was being rude to someone. She needed those 40 minutes, not for music. For the podcast she'd been working through for the past 6 weeks, a series on international contract law, in Mandarin, advanced level. The content a lawyer would study before a major cross-border negotiation. She had found it by accident, and then listened to the first episodes and then the second, and pulled out her notebook and started writing. The notebook was open in front of her now. Next to the thermos, she was eating and writing the way she always did. A bite, a note, another bite. Her handwriting shifted languages the way some people shift between radio stations, naturally, without stopping. She was on her fourth page when Deshaun sat down across from her, Deshaun Mitchell, 33 years old. He had been at the Meridian Grand for 2 years. He moved luggage and staffed the valet on weekends and had a voice built for outdoor spaces that didn't always adjust when he came inside. He put his tray down and looked at the notebook. What language is that one? Arabic? And that one next to it? French. Different grammar construction. He nodded slowly. Like this made complete sense. How many do you have in there total? Four. He picked up his fork. What do you do with 4 languages at a hotel hall? She looked at him over the notebook. I don't do anything with them. I just have them. He chewed. Consider this. Seems like a waste. She capped her pen. Yeah, she'd say anything else. Closed the notebook. Went back to her thermos. Put her earbuds back in. Saint-Jean ate his lunch without commenting further, which was one of the things she appreciated about him. He had a functional sense of when to stop talking. At 15 in the afternoon, Zara was in the main lobby, polishing the glass tables near the seating area. 3 of them. Low and heavy. Tables that looked effortless and were constant maintenance because every single person who sat near her put theirs on the surface at some point, and glass holds fingerprints the way nothing else does. She had been working on the section table for about 4 minutes when she noticed the man on the sofa. Young, late 20s, part of the Chinese delegation. She had seen him briefly that morning when the group moved through the lobby. He was sitting with his phone pressed to his ear, body angled away from the room in the way people angle themselves when they're having a conversation they don't want overheard. He was speaking Mandarin, fast, low, tight. She was 3 meters away. She understood every word. He was telling someone that the interpreter was a problem, that Wei Jianming had been raising real concerns all morning, and Thomas Liang had been translating them into something softer and vaguer and almost unrecognizable, that the specific question about governance, about who would retain authority after the deal, had been turned into a general comment about flexibility. That Wei Jianjing had noticed that he was losing patience, that if this continued he would leave. He said, Wei Jianming does not trust anyone in this room, he said. If we cannot communicate clearly, there is struggle. Zara's hand stopped moving on the glass. She was still holding the cloth, still in position. From the outside, a person cleaning a table. But she had stopped. She was listening with her whole body. Because what this man was describing was exactly what she had heard through the fire door at 9:40 that morning. The gap she had identified between what Wei Jianming said and what Thomas Liang had communicated. Not a misunderstanding, not an approximation, a real translation failure, with real consequences. And this man was describing those consequences in real time, and nobody in this lobby was listening because nobody in this lobby understood what he was saying. Except Zara. A second man from the delegation walked over, said something to the younger one, short, practical. He was asking where the restroom was, in Mandarin, and Zara didn't plan it. It wasn't a decision. It was just what happens when someone asks a question in a language you speak. You answer. She looked up from the table, pointed down the corridor toward the east wing, and said, in Mandarin, calm and clear and completely natural, down the hall. Second door on your left. 4 seconds. That was all. The younger man lowered his phone. Both of them turned and looked at her, at the cloth in her hand, at the spray bottle clipped to her apron, at the cart parked here with its stacks of supplies, at her, at the uniform. The younger man's mouth opened slightly. He didn't speak for a moment, then, under his breath, just loud enough for his colleague. Did she just speak to us in Mandarin? His colleague looked at Zara, then back at him. Zara had already turned out of the table. Same motion, same speed, like nothing had happened, like she was just a person cleaning glass in the lobby of a hotel. But her heart was moving at a different rate than her hands. And somewhere behind a column near the lobby entrance, Diana Holt had seen the whole thing. Diana had been adjusting a flower arrangement, not technically her job, but she had a habit of involving herself in the small details of the lobby presentation when she was anxious. straightening things that didn't need straightening, moving vases 2 inches left and then 2 inches back. She had been anxious all morning. The 2 p.m. meeting was the most significant thing the Meridian Grand had hosted in 3 years. She was in charge of it. Thomas Liang had been her hire. The pre-meeting walkthrough had not gone as smoothly as she'd been told, and she was standing near the flower arrangement, trying to feel like she's had some control over something when she looked up and saw it. Zara Coleman, standing at the glass table, talking to 2 members of the Chinese delegation, not pointing, not gesturing, not looking up directions on a tablet, talking, in a way that had both men completely still, in a way that looked more natural and more engaged than anything Diana had seen from her own staff all day. She watched for 6 seconds, then she crossed the lobby, fast, direct, no hesitation and no expression. She didn't wait, didn't pull Zara aside, didn't lower her voice, didn't consider that there were people watching. Front desk staff, bellhops, 2 guests in the seating area with newspapers that were no longer being read. "What do you think you're doing?" Zara turned. "They asked me for directions. I was just what? Not a question. A wall. Playing translator? Because you picked up a few words somewhere?" Zara didn't respond. Diana took 1 step closer, her voice dropped, which somehow made it worse, the quiet that cuts deeper than volume. "Let me be very clear. You clean rooms. That is your job. That is the entire scopes of what you do here. You are not qualified to approach guests above the 4th floor. You are absolutely not qualified to open your mouth in front of people who are here for a negotiation of this magnitude." The lobby had gone still, not silent. The ambient sounds were still there. The fountain near the entrance, the distant elevator chime. But the human sounds, the small movements and half-conversations and rustles of people going about things, those had stopped. "If I see you near a VIP guest one more time," Diana said, "I will personally make sure you do not work in this city again. Not here, not anywhere." She held for 1 more second, then turned and walked away, her heels on the marble. Click, click. Zara stood still. The bell near the elevator was looking at his shoes. The woman at the front desk was looking at her screen. The guests with the newspapers had gone back to the newspaper, not because there was nothing to see, because there was too much, and nobody in that lobby knew what to do with it. 3 seconds passed. "Yes, ma'am." Zara turned and walked to the service elevator, pressed the button, waited. The doors opened. She stepped aside. The doors closed, and in the 30 seconds it took to travel from the ground floor to the 9th, she broke, not loudly. Nothing that anyone would have seen, just the way the air went out of her all at once. She leaned against the metal wall, cold through the fabric of her uniform. She looked down at her hands, shaking slightly, the cloth still in her right hand. She reached into her front pocket, pulled out the notebook, opened it to page 34. The folded square of paper was there. Diana's handwriting, no professional communication background. She had read it so many times she didn't need to read it anymore. She just felt it. She turned to the next page. Blank. She picked up the pen clipped to the inside cover, pressed the tip to the paper, wrote 3 words. Maybe she's right. Ader stopped. Floor 9. The doors opened, nobody waiting. Just the empty hallway and the HVAC hum and the distant sound of another cart, somewhere in the east wing. Zara looked at the 3 words, then she uncapped the pen again and drew a single line through them. Not erasing, not replacing, not writing anything in their place, just a line. She closed the notebook. The elevator doors started to close. She pressed the button for the lobby level before they did. Because the shift wasn't over, because she had 6 rooms left on her list, because whatever she had heard through that fire door at 40, whatever was happening right now in those pre-meeting sessions, whatever was going to happen at 2 p.m. behind those frosted glass doors, it was not her problem. She was a person who cleaned rooms. That was what the handwriting said. That was what Diana had just said out loud in front of everyone. The elevator moved. The bracelet caught the light from the fluorescent strip above her. She looked at it for a moment. Then the doors opened, and she went back to work. The business center on the 9th floor was the kind of room that existed to be used and forgotten. No windows, fluorescent lighting that buzzed just below the threshold of what most people consciously registered. A printer, 2 desktop computers, a round table with 4 chairs that had been pushed slightly out of alignment and never pushed back, a recycling bin in the corner that Zara was supposed to empty on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It was Thursday. She wheeled her cart to the door at 1:40 in the afternoon, used her key card, stepped inside. As the sink was empty, she went to the recycling bin first, the bag, not much in it, and a few printouts, an energy drink can, a sticky note with a phone number, and nothing else. She was about to tie off the bag when she noticed the printer tray, a stack of papers, maybe 20 pages, face up. Someone had printed them and walked away, left them sitting there the way people leave things in shared spaces when they're in a hurry, when they assume they'll come back, when they forget that forgetting is a luxury not everyone can afford. She should have left them. She had 5 more rooms on her list, and it was already 1:40, and the 2 p.m. meeting was going to change the energy of the entire floor, and she knew it. She picked up the papers, not to read them, just to see if they were something that needed to go somewhere. A document left in a shared space could mean anything. She looked at the top page, a terminology language sheet, English language, corporate acquisition agreement. Formatted like a glossary, left column, English term. Right column, definition and usage notes. Read the first entry, then the second. Then she stopped pretending she was doing anything other than reading. Collaborative oversight, the English term. The definition was precise, shared decision-making authority retained by both parties following acquisition close. Neither party holds a unilateral control. All major operational decisions require mutual agreement. She stood very still. Read it again. Then she thought about what she had heard through the fire door at 9:40 that morning. The specific question Wei Jianjing had the specific answer Thomas Liang had given. She ran the Mandarin back through her memory, the way she ran language through her memory, without softening it, without approximating. The phrase Thomas had used did not mean shared decision-making. It did not mean mutual agreement. The phrase Thomas had used meant transfer of authority. Full handover. The acquiring party assumes complete operational control. Those were not the same thing. Those were not even in the same neighborhood. She looked at the terminology sheet in her hands, then at the wall, then at the sheet again. 2 sides, same table, same document with 2 different names on the signature line, and in the space between the English version and what had been communicated in Mandarin, a gap so wide that the entire deal had fallen into it without anyone on either side knowing. Wei Jianming was not being difficult. Wei Jianming was responding logically to a contract that in the language he had been given asked him to surrender everything. And he didn't know that wasn't what the English version said. And the people on the other side of the table didn't know that wasn't what he'd been told. And Saxa Thomas Lang was either fall through too far into the mistake to correct it or didn't understand enough to realize he'd made it. She set the papers back on the printer tray, exactly as she'd found them. Face up, edges aligned. She stood in the center of the business center. The fluorescent light buzzed above her. The recycling bag was in her hand. The replacement bag was on her cart outside the door. She could walk out of this room right now. She could go to room 1719 and turn down the bed and replace the soap and check the minibar and get through the rest of her list before the shift ended. She knew exactly how to do that. She had done it hundreds of times. The sequence was in her body. She could also tell someone what she knew, except Diana had just told her in front of the entire lobby that she was not qualified to open her mouth in front of anyone connected to this deal. That if she showed her face near a VIP guest one more time, her career in this city was finished. That the scope of her job began and ended with the rooms. So she could tell someone. But who? And would they listen? And if they didn't, dismissed her the way Diana had dismissed her 40 minutes ago, in front of the bellhops and the front desk staff and the guests with the newspapers, then what? She tied off the recycling bag, replaced it with a fresh one, pushed her cart out the door and let it close behind her. The hallway was quiet. She stood in it for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she started walking. The employee break room at 1:48 in the afternoon smelled like burnt coffee and someone's reheated lunch and the specific exhaustion of a room that has been used all day by people who would rather be somewhere else. Zara sat at the far end of the table. She wasn't eating. Her thermos was in front of her, but she hadn't opened it. The notebook was on the table, but she hadn't opened that either. Her hands were flat on the surface since she was looking at the wall, and she was not thinking about the wall at all. She was thinking about the terminology sheet. She was thinking about the fire door. She was thinking about 3 words with a line through them. She was thinking about Ruth, who had spent 28 years cleaning offices and who had never once been asked what she knew, who had noticed things about the people in those buildings and the rhythms of those spaces that the people who owned the buildings never knew, who had come home every night and said nothing about any of it because nobody had ever created a space where she was expected to say anything. The door opened. She didn't look up. Footsteps, the specific weight and cease of someone she recognized. A tray being set on the table not across from her, but at the angle beside her. Not confrontational, just present. Deshawn sat down. He didn't say anything immediately. That was one of the things about Deshawn. He had a particular ability to be in a space without filling it right away. He had told her once that his grandmother had taught him that. You don't always need to be the first sound in the room. He poured something from his thermos, set it down, looked at her. You okay? She didn't answer. He nodded. Once. That's a no. She looked at the table, then at him, and she told him. Not quickly. She told him about the fire door at 9:40, about Wei Jianming and what he had actually said and what Thomas Liang had actually translated, about the terminology sheet in the business center, about collaborative oversight and what it meant in English and what Thomas had communicated it to mean, about the gap, the trial size of it. Deshawn listened. He was good at that. Listening without preparing his response while she was still talking. He had a face that didn't perform reaction. It just received information, and when she was done, it showed what it actually thought. What it actually thought right now was complicated. He was quiet for a moment then. You already know what's right. She looked at him. I'm serious, or you already know. I can see it. He wrapped both hands around his cup. The only question is whether you can live with staying quiet. She didn't answer that, because the answer was tangled up in Diana's voice in the lobby 40 minutes ago, and the handwriting on the rejection letter on page 34, and the fact that she had tried once through the correct channel to be taken seriously and had received a note in her own margin in return, because staying quiet was not the same as being wrong, and speaking up was not the same as being heard. There's nobody to tell, she said. That's not true. Gina just told me in front of the whole lobby. Diana is not the only person in this building. She looked at him. He held her gaze. Robert Okafor, general manager, 3rd floor. He picked up his cup. Yeah. You've never spoken to him. He's the GM. Yeah. He drank, set the cup down, and you know 4 languages, and you just figured out that a deal worth over $1 billion is about to collapse because the interpreter doesn't know the difference between shared oversight and full transfer of authority. He shrugged, one shoulder. Easy, like it was the most obvious thing. But sure, he's the gem. She said nothing. Deshawn said nothing either. They sat in the break room in the burnt coffee and the fluorescent hum above them and the sound of the hotel continuing around them. Carts in the hallway, an elevator chiming somewhere above, the particular ambient noise of a building that never fully stops. Then the door opened again. Neither of them had heard footsteps. The door just opened and Peggy Shaw was standing in it, 60 years old, white hair cut close. The posture of someone who has spent 2.5 decades standing behind a front desk where you cannot slump. She was wearing her name tag on her left side, and her reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, and she was looking directly at Zara with an expression that was not pity and not curiosity. It was something more specific than both. She stepped inside, pulled out the chair next to Zara, not across the table, right beside her, sat down. The guest in 714 called the front desk, she said. Zara looked at her. He asked who wrote the note in his room. Said the handwriting was beautiful. Said the French was the kind of French you don't learn from a class. She paused. He asked for the person by name. Zara didn't say anything. I gave him yours. Peggy looked at her steadily. I hope that's all right. Still nothing from Zara. Peggy's eyes moved to the notebook on the table, closed. But the cover was visible, the worn spine, the rubber band. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Zara. How many languages? 4 words. Simple question. But it landed differently than it should have. Because nobody at the Meridian Grand had ever asked it. Nobody had ever asked her anything about the notebook or the earbuds or the podcasts or the library or any of the things that constituted the actual substance of her life outside the rooms. Deshawn was watching. Zaza looked at Peggy, and she told her, not just the number, everything. The way you tell someone everything when you've been carrying it alone long enough, and someone finally asks the right question at the right moment with the right face. She told her about Ruth, about the library card, about the language section, about Mandarin and the tourist family who couldn't find the restaurant, about the notebook, about the night school Arabic class that lost its funding, and then she told her about that morning, the fire door, Wei Jianming, Thomas lying, the specific gap between what was said and what was heard, and then the business center, terminology sheet, collaborative oversight, what it meant in English, what it had been communicated to mean in Mandarin. Two sides, same table, two completely different deals, neither side aware. Peggy listened the way she had listened to people for 24 years. Not waiting to speak, not composing her response, just taking it in, all of it. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes did. Something moved through them and settled. When Zara stopped talking, the room was quiet. Deshawn had both hands around his cup and was very still. Peggy looked at the table for a moment. Then she said, "Diana can fire you for speaking up." Zara said, "Yes, but if you stay silent, you fire yourself. Every day, for the rest of your life." The break room held that sentence for a moment. Peggy put her hands flat on the table, pushed herself up, stood. "Come with me." The elevator ride took 40 seconds. Nobody spoke. Zara had her notebook under her arm, and her cart was still parked outside the business center on the 9th floor, and she was walking down a hallway she had walked down maybe 4 times in 3 years. Not because she was forbidden from it, just because there had never been a reason. The 3rd floor was offices administration, people whose names appeared on doors. It was not her floor. The nameplate outside the last door on the left read, Robert Okafor, General Manager. An assistant sat at a desk just inside, young, organized with the specific precision of someone who manages someone else's time for a living. She looked up when they appeared in the doorway, at Peggy first, then at Zara, at the uniform, at the spray bottle still clipped to her apron that she'd forgotten to remove before coming upstairs. "He's preparing for the 2 o'clock, the assistant said. "He's not available for walk-ins." Peggy said, "She has critical information about that meeting." "I understand, but I have been at this hotel for 24 years. Peggy's voice was even, not raised, just certain. The way certain people are certain without needing to perform it. I am vouching for her personally. The assistant looked at Peggy for a long moment. 24 years was not nothing. 24 years was a credential that didn't appear on any organization chart, but that everyone who worked in a place long enough understood. It was the credential of someone who had seen enough to know when something mattered, and who had never previously used it like this. The assistant stood, knocked twice on the inner door, opened it a few inches, spout quietly, waited. Peggy turned to Zara, nodded once. Zara walked in alone. Robert Okafor was 54 years old. He was sitting behind a desk that was large enough to suggest authority and organized in a way that suggested he actually used it. Papers in specific positions, a laptop open, a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago and been pushed to the side without being finished. He had a pen in his hand and was looking at something when Zara came in, and he looked up without finishing whatever he'd been reading. He did not call his assistant back, did not ask why there was a woman in a housekeeping uniform standing in his office 11 minutes before the most significant meeting the hotel had hosted in years. He set the pen down and he waited. "You have 10 minutes, he said. She used 8. She told it the same way she'd told Peggy. No embellishment, no hedging, no apology for being in the room. The facts, arranged in order, communicate precisely. 9:40 a.m. Fire door. What Wei Jianming said, what Thomas Liang translated, the specific governance clause, the specific language around decision-making authority, the gap between them, 1:40 p.m. Business center. Terminology sheet left on the printer, collaborative oversight. English definition, Mandarin translation as delivered. The difference between shared decision-making and full transfer of control. Conclusion. To parties at the same table, operating under 2 different understandings of what they were signing, neither side aware. She stopped. Okafor had not moved during the 8 minutes. He had the focused stillness of someone who knows how to distinguish between information and noise, and who is currently processing information. His expression had shifted once, slightly, around the part about the governance clause. Then settled back. He turned his laptop to face her, pulled up a document, scrolled to a paragraph, turned the screen so she could see it clearly. Translate this. She read it. The Mandarin version of the acquisition agreement. The governance section. The exact clause. She translated it. Live, no pause, no search for words, terminology precise. Register formal and legally accurate. The translation of someone who had spent 6 weeks working through a podcast series on international contract law in Mandarin, because she had happened to find it and because that was what she did with her evenings. Okafor looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood. He was taller than she'd registered from the doorway. He came around the desk and stood in front of her, not crowding, just present, giving the moment the space it required. My father worked the line at an automotive plant in Detroit for 22 years, he said. He waited. He knew to every process in that plant, every sequence, every failure point before it became one. He had been watching those machines long enough to know things that the engineers who designed them didn't know anymore. A pause. Nobody asked him what he knew. The office was quiet. Outside the window, Chicago was doing what it does at midday, moving, continuous and indifferent. I'm going to ask you something, Okafor said, and I need the truth. She looked at him. If you walk into that room, in front of my board, in front of the ownership group, in front of a man who controls more capital than most people encounter in a lifetime, he let that sit, and it falls apart. The translation is wrong. Something you miss or misread, the deal collapses. $2 billion, with your name attached to what happened. He held her gaze. Can you carry that? Not rhetorical, not dramatic. Just the question, flat and real and requiring a real answer. Zara looked back at him. Yes, one word, no conditions attached to it. No qualifications. Okafor held the eye contact for 3 full seconds, then something shifted in his expression. Small, almost invisible, but there. If you'd said anything else, he said, I wouldn't have believed you could do it. He turned back to the desk, picked up the phone. Dialed 2 numbers, Thomas Liang's access badge. Suspended effective immediately. A pause. Yes, now. He hung up, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, put it on. Then he looked at Zara. He walked out of the office beside her. Not in front, not behind. Beside, Peggy was still near the assistant's desk. She looked at Zara first, then at Okafor. Something moved across her face that she controlled before it finished moving. Okafor looked at her. 24 years. Peggy straightened slightly. 24 years. He kept walking. Zafra followed. The hallway from the 3rd floor administrative wing to the corridor was about 60 feet long. They walked it without speaking. Zara was aware of her shoes. She was always as aware of her shoes in certain moments. The left soles had separating from the upper about 6 months after she bought them. She had used adhesive 3 times. The 3rd application had held well enough that she'd mostly stopped thinking about it. But in moments of particular stillness or particular pressure, the awareness came back. Right now, the sole made a sound against the carpet every few steps. She was aware of it. She was also aware of Okafor's shoes, leather soles. The sound they made on the floor was flat and assured. The sound of someone who bought shoes without calculating the budget first. 2 different sounds. Same hallway. Same direct. Okafor spoke without looking at her. Eyes forward. My father retired after 22 years. On his last day, the floor supervisor shook his hand and told him he'd been a good worker. He said the last 2 words with something in his voice. Not bitterness. Not performance. Just the honest weight of them. A good worker. 22 years. That was it. She understood that weight. She understood it in the place where things settle when you've been carrying them for years. My grandmother cleaned offices for 28 years, she said. Quiet. She could tell you the story behind every photograph on every desk she cleaned. She knew who was struggling and who had just come back from somewhere good, and who was fighting with someone by the way they left their workspace at the end of the day. She paused. Nobody ever asked her what she noticed. Okafor didn't respond immediately. Then, no, they never do. They reached the end of the corridor, turned toward the main hallway, the one that led to the grand boardroom. The marble floor here was wider, the ceiling higher, the light different. The sound of his shoes changed against the harder surface. Clicked in her left sole, squeaked, clicks, squeak, click, squeak, down the length of that hallway. Together. Behind them, somewhere she couldn't see, Peggy Shaw had come down and was moving toward the front desk. Her hands, when she reached the counter and placed them on its surface, were not entirely steady. She gripped the edge, watched the two figures moving down the corridor, the leather soles and the glued soles, and the two completely different sounds they made on the same floor going in the same direction. 24 years. Every decision she had made in 24 years had been calibrated toward a certain kind of stability, toward not disrupting things that couldn't be undone, toward waiting for the right moment and being sure the moment was real before committing to it. She hoped this was the right moment. She gripped the counter and watched and did not look away. Outside the grand boardroom, the hallway widened, frosted glass on the double doors through it. Shapes, movement, the muffled acoustics of a room where the atmosphere had already gone wrong. Okafor stopped, looked at Zara. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. Then he put his hand on the door and pushed it open. The room was everything it was supposed to be. Mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows with Chicago beyond the glass, 12 leather chairs, crystal water glasses arranged along the center of the table with precision. Not one of them had been touched. On one side of the table, the hotel's executive team. Diana Holt seated prominently toward the center. Her posture was the posture of someone who had prepared for a specific meeting
and was inside exam.
Back straight, jaw set, a legal pad in front of her with two words written on it, and then nothing after. Arthur Finch sat against the wall slightly apart from the others. The position of someone who has arranged himself to see the whole room without being at the center of it. He had a notebook on his knee and a pen that was not currently in use. He had been introduced to Zara in the pre-meeting briefing documents as a representative of the ownership group. His actual influence was something she would come to understand later. On the other side of the table, the Chinese delegation. 6 men, suits that fit in the way that suits fit when they have been made for a specific person. A stillness about them that was not relaxation, and at the far end of the table, Wei Jianming, arms folded. The expression of a man who has already made his decision and is waiting for the correct moment in Pongsu Tsemsit. His briefcase was on the table in front of him, closed but present. The room was not actually cold, but it felt cold. Okafor walked in. Zara followed. Every head at the table turned. Diana was on her feet before the door had fully opened, her chair scraped back against the floor. Robert. Her voice was controlled. Just barely. What is this? She is a housekeeping employee. I gave explicit instructions, Diana. Okafor's voice was flat and even and not unkind. Sit down or leave the room. Choose one. The room did not breathe. Diana looked around the table, at the delegation, at Arthur Finch, who was watching with an expression that gave away nothing but whose pen had lifted slightly from his knee. At the members of her own team, who were all finding different things to look at that were not Diana's face. Nobody moved toward her. Nobody said a word. She sat down. Her hands found the armrests. Her knuckles went a specific shade of pale. Wei Jianming looked at Zara. Not at Okafor, not at Diana, not at the rest of the room, at Zara. He looked at the uniform, the spray bottle still clipped to her apron, her face. Then he began to speak in Mandarin. His voice was measured, each word carrying exactly the weight he intended. He was listing concerns, one by one, the governance clause, the translation issues throughout the day, the sense that his words had been softened into something that no longer resembled what he'd said, the sense that the people on the other side of this table did not actually understand what he was asking for or what he was willing to agree to. His voice rose on the 4th concern. Stayed elevated through the 5th and 6th. He concluded with 7 words in Mandarin that were clear and final and left no room for negotiation. He reached forward, opened his briefcase, and began to slide papers into it. The room watched him. Diana's hands tightened on the armrests. Okafor looked at Zara. This was it. The moment he had described in his office 14 minutes ago. 1.2 billion was sir. With your name attached to what happens next. She had said yes. Now it was time to find out what that word was worth. Zara stepped forward. She did not ask permission. She did not wait to be introduced. She did not look at Diana, or at the hotel team, or at Arthur Finch in the corner with his pen lifted. She looked at Wei Jianming and she began to speak. In Mandarin. First, she repeated his concerns back to him. Not a summary, not a softened version. Each one. In the order he had raised them. In the language and register he had used. The governance clause. The translation failures. The specific language around decision-making authority that had reached each as something entirely different from what the English version contained. She repeated it the way you repeat something when you have actually listened to it. Not when you processed it and translated it into something manageable, but when you took it in exactly as it was given. Wei Jianming's hand slowed inside the briefcase. The papers stopped moving. He was looking at her. She kept going. She explained the gap. Clearly, collaborative oversight. What it meant in the English contract. What it had been indicated to mean in the version his team had been receiving all day. The difference between shared decision-making authority, retained by both parties, and full transfer of operational control to the acquiring side. She explained it in the language of contract law because she had spent 6 weeks listening to a podcast series on international contract law in Mandarin on her lunch breaks in a room that smelled like burnt coffee. She explained it because the gap was real, and because someone in the room needed to name it, and because she was the only person in the room who could. Then she said the sentence. She said it in Mandarin first, then in English for the room. You were not being deceived. A beat. You were being mistranslated. Another beat. Smaller. Those are two entirely different things. The crystal water glasses caught the light from the windows. Nobody touched them. Nobody spoke. Wei Jianming looked at Zara for a long moment, a real moment. The kind that takes up more space than its section suggests. He was not looking at the uniform now. He was not looking at the spray bottle or the shoes. He was looking at her eyes, at the steadiness in her voice, at the specific quality of someone who has told the truth and knows it and is not waiting to be thanked for it. He reached into the briefcase and took his hand out empty. He closed the briefcase, set it to the side, unfolded his arms, and sat back. The room released something quietly, all at once, the specific exhale of a space that has been holding its breath and has finally been given permission to stop. Diana's hands were still on the armrests, but they were no longer gripping. Arthur Finch had made a single mark in his notebook. One mark, then held the pen still in the doorway because he had followed from downstairs without anyone asking him to, because I had heard from another staff member that something was happening, and had gone toward it the way he always went toward things that involved Zara. Deshaun Mitchell stood with one hand partially raised to his mouth. Watching, Wei Jianming looked at Zara, and he said in Mandarin one word, clear, unhurried, final, continue. For 45 minutes, not performing, not presenting. Just doing the things she had been doing alone in library carousels and break rooms and service elevators for the better part of 8 years, listening precisely, translating honestly, finding the English equivalent of a Mandarin expression, not word for word, but meaning for meaning. Catching the moment when the hotel's legal team used a phrase that would land badly in Wei Jianming's register, and adjusting the delivery without adjusting the substance. She was not a machine running 2 languages simultaneously. She was a person who understood that language is not just vocabulary and grammar. It is the accumulated weight of how a culture thinks about power and respect and obligation and time. She had been studying that weight for years, not in a classroom, not toward a credential. Just because Ruth had told her once that the gap between what someone says and what someone hears is where most of the damage in the world gets done. Zara had believed her. So she bridged it, every time it appeared, across 45 minutes conversation that moved from the governance clause to the operational timeline to the transitional oversight committee. The water glasses were touched now. First Wei Jianming's, then the man beside him. Then slowly, one by one, the glasses on the hotel's side of the table. The room had changed, not the room itself. The HVAC was doing the same thing it had been doing all day. The light through the windows was the same Chicago afternoon, but the quality of the air inside had shifted, the tightness. The atmospheric pressure of a space where something is about to go very wrong had become something else. Not certainty yet, but no longer the absence of it. Diana was still in her chair. She had not said a word since Okafor told her to sit down. Her legal pad was in front of her, still with those 2 words and then nothing after. She was watching Zara. Her expression had moved through several things in the past 45 minutes. Fury first. Then something she was no longer performing for the room, because the room had stopped paying attention to her 20 minutes in, and she had felt that shift and gone quiet inside. Arthur Finch had been writing in his notebook for the past half hour, steadily. Nobody had seen him start. Near the end of the 45th minute, Wei Jianming raised one hand. The room stopped. He looked at Okafor, said something short. Zara translated. He would like to speak with you privately. Okafor nodded once. People began to stand. The delegation filed out first. The executive team followed. Diana left without making eye contact with anyone in particular. The last one through the door was Arthur Finch, who paused at the threshold for half a second and looked back at Zara with an expression she couldn't fully read, then walked out and pulled the door closed quietly behind him. 3 people remained: Okafor, Zara, and Wei Jianming. The boardroom felt larger with fewer people in it. The Chicago skyline was doing what it does in late afternoon, going gold at the edges. Light moving through the floor-to-ceiling windows at an angle that caught the crystal water glasses and threw small, slow refractions across the surface of the mahogany table. Wei Jianming sat back in his chair. The sharpness that had defined his presence all day had not disappeared, but it had reorganized itself. Still there, just directed differently, less like a wall and more like a tension. He spoke, taking his time, each word measured. The cadence of someone who has learned that precision matters more than speed. Zara translated as he went. The deal would proceed. The governance clause would be rewritten to reflect the collaborative oversight structure as defined in the English version. His team would remain in Chicago through the end of the week to finalize the revised language. All communication during the transitional period would be conducted with a designated liaison present on both sides. He paused. Then he looked at Zara, not at Okafor, at her, and he spoke directly to her for the first time. She translated for Okafor after he finished. He says his condition is non-negotiable. I serve as the primary liaison between both parties for the full duration of the transition. Not a suggestion. A condition of the deal moving forward. Okafor did not hesitate, did not check his calendar or consider the organizational structure or ask for a moment to think. Agreed. Wei Jianming held Zara's gaze for a moment. Then he leaned forward slightly and lowered his head, not deeply, not as a performance, a small, deliberate inclination. The kind of gesture that in the context of who he was and what room this was and what the last 8 hours had contained, carried more weight than most things that get said out loud. In his world, in the world he moved through, that gesture was not casual. It was the specific language of respect from someone who did not distribute it without reason. He said one more thing, quietly, almost to himself. But not quite. Zara was still for a moment after he finished. Then she looked at Okafor. He says, today, I was the only person in this building who spoke to him without a mask. The boardroom held that sentence. The refractions from the water glasses moved slowly across the table as the afternoon light shifted. Okafor looked at Zara for a long moment. The kind of moment that people remember later, not for what was said in it, but for what it felt like to be standing inside it. Then he extended his hand. Not the way a manager extends a hand to an employee. Not a transaction between levels of an organization. Just one person extending a hand to another person who had done something real in a room that required it. She shook it, firm, steady. Okafor pushed the boardroom doors open. The hallway was full, not a planned gathering. Just the accumulation of people who had heard something was happening and had moved toward it, the way people move toward things in buildings where they spend most of their waking hours. Bellhops near the elevator bank. Front desk staff leaning past the edge of the corridor. 2 members of the catering team still in their aprons who had no operational reason to be on this floor. Deshaun Mitchell standing slightly apart from the group with his arms at his sides and his face doing something he wasn't trying to control. The Chinese delegation had arranged themselves in a cluster to one side, bow near the front. The hotel executive team on the other side. Various expressions, various degrees of understand about what had happened behind those frosted glass doors in the past 45 minutes. Okafor stepped out. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The hallway had gone quiet the moment the doors opened. I want this on record, he said. Today's deal was preserved by Zara Coleman, an employee our own system nearly failed to see. He paused, not for effect, because the next part required care. That failure belongs to the system, not to her. The hallway held at it for a moment. Then things began to move. Bao stepped forward first. He extended his hand to Zara, and when she took it, he held it a beat longer than the standard duration of a handshake. He was looking at her directly, not at the uniform, not at the spray bottle still clipped to her apron. I knew, he said, in English. Careful and deliberate. The moment you answered me in the lobby this afternoon, I knew. Deshaun said sound, not a word. Something from lower than words. He pressed one hand over his mouth and looked away at the wall, and his shoulders moved once. When he looked back, his eyes were wet, and he was not doing anything about it. Peggy Shaw was at the far end of the hallway. She had come back down at some point. Nobody had seen her arrive. She was just there, standing behind the front desk with both hands on the edge of the counter. Her knuckles were the color of someone holding on with everything they have. Her face was wet. She wasn't wiping it, or hiding it, or performing it. Just standing there with 24 years behind her, and letting her face do what it was doing. She did not look away from Zara, not once. Arthur Finch moved through the edge of the crowd without drawing attention to himself. He reached Zara, reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, produced a business card. Plain, heavy stock, placed it in her hand without ceremony. Then said 3 words, "Call me Monday," and walked away the same way he had moved through the crowd, without drama, like a man who identified exactly what he came to do and has done it. The guest from room 17 Fort was crossing the lobby below the staircase at that moment, rolling his luggage toward the exit. He had no connection to the boardroom or the delegation or any of what had happened in this building today. He was a man with a bag leaving a hotel where someone had written him a note in careful French that morning and arranged his pillows and signed it with only a number. He glanced up as he passed the base of the stairs, saw Zara at the top of the hallway in the middle of the gathered people, and he lifted one hand, a small, unhurried wave. The way you acknowledge someone who did something kind for you and whom you may not see again but are glad to see one more time. That was all he knew about her. It was enough. The hallway began to clear. People had things to return to. The dinner service was starting. Rooms needed attending. The delegation had calls to make. Life's lease resumed the Luzois after something significant happens in the middle of an ordinary working day. Not all at once, just gradually, the crowd thinning and the noise returning to its baseline and the building finding its way back to the rhythms that had held it for 40 years. Deshawn passed Zara on his way back to the service area. He didn't say anything. He put one hand briefly on her shoulder as he went. Kept walking. Peggy came down the hall, slower. She stopped in front of Zara and looked at her for a moment. There was still something on her face from before. She didn't address it directly. "Go home on time tonight," she said. Then she walked back to the front desk. That evening, Diana Holt's office on the 2nd floor was lit by the single lamp on her desk. The rest of the building had mostly emptied. Night staff coming in, day staff gone, the particular quiet of a large building after hours settling through the corridors and the stairwells and the spaces between things. Diana was at her desk. She had been there since the meeting ended. Not working. The laptop screen had gone dark from inactivity. A pen was in her hand, but the legal pad in front of her was blank. She had been sitting in the posture of someone working without doing any of the things that work requires. She had replayed the afternoon. Not voluntarily. It kept coming anyway. The moment the boardroom doors opened and Zara walked in, the moment she herself had stood up and Okafor said, "Sit down or leave," and she sat down. The 45 minutes that followed, the water glasses being touched around the table one by one. Wei Jianming's posture changing, the room changing. She had sat in that room and watched all of it and could not do a single thing about any of it. The knock at her door was quiet. She looked up. Okafor was in the doorway. He came in without being invited. That was unusual. He was generally precise about the small, formal courtesies. But tonight he came straight across to her desk and set something on it, a single piece of paper. Then he looked at her for exactly 1 moment. Then he turned and walked out and closed the door softly behind him. Diana looked at the paper, a printout, a job application, for the front desk position that had been posted 14 months ago. Her name was at the top of the routing sheet. Her handwriting was visible in the margin. Blue ink, her own careful cursive, no professional communication background. She stared at it then, something that she hadn't planned on. She went somewhere she hadn't intended to go. 19 years back, a town in Georgia that doesn't appear on most maps. A 28-year-old woman with a suitcase that had a broken wheel and a southern accent that made people in Chicago raise their eyebrows, and a job application for an entry-level position at a hotel downtown. She had been turned down for that position. The note on her application said something about needing candidates with demonstrated urban hospitality experience. She hadn't had that. What she'd had was a willingness to learn anything from anyone, and the particular hunger of a person who has grown up without enough of things and intends to find a way out of that condition through work and attention and refusing to stop. Someone had given her a second interview anyway. A woman. A manager with reading glasses and short hair who had looked at the application and then looked at Diana across a desk and said, "Tell me what you can do, not what the resume says, what you actually can do." Diana had spent the next 3 hours telling her. She had built her entire career from that conversation, every position, every promotion, every carefully managed relationship, and strategically cultivated reputation over 19 years. All of it traced back to one person who had decided to ask the question rather than make the assumption. And Diana had never once done that for anyone else. She had become the gatekeeper. She had become the system. The exact system that had nearly kept her out 19 years ago. She sat with that for a long time. The lamp made its circle of light on the desk. Outside the window, Chicago continued at the pace it always continues. Indifferent and lit and entirely unconcerned with what was happening in this office. She did not move for a very long time. 2 months later, on a Tuesday morning, Zara was in her office on the second floor when the email arrived. The office was small. It had been a storage room. Someone had moved the shelves out and brought in a desk and a chair and a lamp slightly too large for the space that made it feel warm anyway. On the door, a placard with her name and her title. Cultural and Linguistic Liaison, Meridian Grand. She had looked at it every morning for 2 months. Every single morning. She opened the email. The sender's name took a moment to register. Not because she had forgotten it, because seeing it in her inbox was different from expecting to see it. Diana Holt, she read it. It was not long. It did not attempt to explain or construct a narrative that made Diana feel better about what she had done. It did not ask for forgiveness or a meeting or a response. One sentence. I looked at you and only saw the uniform. And then, I was wrong. Zara read it twice. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the wall for a moment. She thought about responding, about what she would say if she did, about whether there was anything to say that wasn't either too much or not enough. She thought about Diana's voice in the lobby 2 months ago, about what it costs to be told in front of people that you don't belong where you're standing, about what it costs to carry that, and about what it costs to keep carrying it past the point where it's still useful to you. She got up, walked to the small printer on the corner shelf, printed the email, 1 page, 1 sentence and 3 words. She opened her desk drawer, took out the notebook, opened it to page 34. The rejection letter was still there, still in that tight, careful square, still carrying the weight of blue ink handwriting that said no professional communication background. She placed Diana's email beside it on the open page. 2 pieces of paper, same handwriting, different words. Between them 14 months and a distance that couldn't be measured in months. She didn't put the notebook away immediately. She sat with it open, looked at both pieces of paper side by side, thought about the fact that people can move. That movement is possible even after a long time of not moving. That it doesn't erase what came before, but it is not nothing either. Then she closed the notebook, put it back in the drawer, opened her laptop. She had a call with Wei Jianming's transition team in 40 minutes. A specific question about subclause 4B that needed resolution before the week ended. She pulled up the document, found the section, read it in English and then in Mandarin, and made a note about where the ambiguity lived and how she would address it on the call. She got to work. 6 of the boardroom, Ruth Coleman Cultural Consultant operated from a desk in Zara's apartment on the north front side of Chicago. Not a fancy office. A second-hand desk she had bought from a listing online, a laptop that was not the one from the Meridian Grand, a business license she had filed for on a Tuesday afternoon at the city clerk's office. The logo was the bracelet, an illustration, simple circle of it, the small green bead clasp. She had drawn it herself on the back of an envelope and had Azar clean it up. Arthur Finch had called the Monday after the boardroom. She had picked up on the second ring. He said he was connected to companies operating across borders who had ongoing need for cultural mediation and linguistic services at a senior level. He had been watching what happened in that boardroom, and in 30 years, he had learned to recognize a specific kind of competence when he was in the room with it. 3 formal offers arrived within the first month. Large companies. Good salaries, benefits, The kind of positions that appear in the category of things people are supposed to want when they have been working toward something for a long time. She turned them all down. Not impulsively. She read each contract carefully. In English and where relevant languages the companies operated in. Thought about what the daily shape of her work would look like inside someone else's structure. Who would decide what problems were worth solving and which ones weren't? She thought about Ruth, who had cleaned the same offices for 28 years and never been asked what she knew, and she wrote a business plan instead. The first client came through Arthur Finch's network, a manufacturing company entering a new market that needed cultural mediation at the executive level. The engagement lasted 3 months. The second client came through the first, the third through the second. By month 4, she had stopped thinking of it as something she was building and started just thinking of it as what she did. The thing about building something yourself is that nobody can revoke it. That had been Ruth's point about language specifically, but Zara had come to understand it applied to more than language. It applied to anything you built in the space between what the world assumed about you and what you actually were. Anything you grew in that gap, quietly, without permission, without anyone watching. That thing was yours in a way that a salary and a title could never quite replicate, because those things existed at someone else's discretion. What she was building existed at the discretion of no one but herself. Peggy Shaw was appointed director of guest relations at the Meridian Grands the same month Zara submitted her resignation. The announcement came at a Monday morning staff meeting. Okafor said a few words, some applause. The ordinary texture of a workplace moment. But Peggy stood in front of the staff for a moment after the applause settled because something had occurred to her, and she said it before she'd decided not to. I didn't discover Zara Coleman, she said. I was just the first person who didn't look away. The room was quiet. Then the corner shift started and everyone went back to what they were doing. The public library on the south side had been at the same corner for 40 years. The building was not beautiful in the way buildings get written about. It was functional. Brick-wide concrete steps worn smooth in the center from 4 decades of foot traffic. The interior smelled the way public libraries smell everywhere. Paper and something chemical and something underneath, both of those things that is harder to name. Possibility, maybe. Or just the accumulated presence of everyone who had ever sat inside it, wanting to know more than they currently did. Zara arrived on a Saturday afternoon in early spring. She had a meeting with the library director about a program she was funding, a language learning initiative. Free, open enrollment, no prerequisites, no application required, no professional communication background needed. She had named it the Ruth Program. The library director was a woman named Carol, who had been in the system for 30 years and had the quality of someone who has spent 3 decades helping people find things they didn't know they were looking for. She had read the proposal, asked 3 questions by email, said yes before the Saturday meeting was technically necessary, but Zazars had wanted to come in person. After the meeting ended, she stayed. She went to the language section, the same shelves. She ran her finger along the spines the way she had done years ago. Some books were different now. Others she recognized. A Mandarin grammar workbook with a blue cover that she was reasonably certain had been in that spot since the first time she came into this building. She pulled it out, looked at the cover, the illustration of characters on the front. The library sticker on the spine with the call number in faded ink. She put it back. She found a table near the window, not the exact table from before. She didn't remember which specific table it had been. But this section, this light, this angle of afternoon coming through the glass. She sat down, put the notebook on the table, her phone, the thermos she still carried everywhere, and 3 other things. Ruth's library card. She had kept it in her wallet for 8 years, the plastic worn soft at the corners. Ruth's name still legible in the printed text. She had carried it like the thinnest possible version of a person, a name on a card. She had never tried to use it, just carried it. The rejection letter in its small frame. Plain wood, clean glass. The application visible inside it with the handwriting in the margin. No professional communication background. It sat on the corner of her desk at home. Every morning she walked past it on her way to make coffee, and the notebook page. The one with 3 words and a single line through them. She had torn it out carefully months ago and framed it identically. The two frames sat next to each other on her desk at home, the rejection and the doubt, side by side, not as wounds, as a record, as the evidence of what she had been told and what she had almost believed and what had turned out not to be true. She arranged all three on the library table, looked at them, then opened her laptop. The Ruth program enrollment page had been live for 3 days. 47 responses in the first 72 hours. People wanting to learn Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, French. People who come from somewhere and wanted to reconnect to the language of that place. People who had never left and wanted to reach towards somewhere new. People who had written long notes in the optional field about why they wanted this. People who had left it blank because the reason felt private or was still forming. She scrolled through without reading all of them. Just the accumulation of names, the accumulation of wanting. At the table beside hers, a woman was working, late 20s. A laptop, something dense with text. A yellow legal pad covered in handwriting. A coffee pushed to the side that had gone cold. She was frowning at her screen with the expression of someone right on the edge of understanding something. Almost there, one step from it. Said something shifted in her face. She wrote something on the legal pad, looked at it, wrote something else underneath. The second thing seemed to land better than the first. She sat back slightly and read what she had written, then she leaned forward and kept going. Zara watched this without meaning to. Just the peripheral awareness of someone in proximity to another person doing something hard and doing it anyway. She looked back at her own screen, closed the enrollment page, opened a new document, a client-client proposal, a company in the Midwest that manufactured industrial equipment and was entering a new market and had contacted her through a referral from Arthur Fruitness Network. She had spoken to their CEO on a call Thursday. He had told her they were having difficulty establishing trust in the early stages, that something kept getting lost, that the conversations were technically happening but not really landing. She had asked him to describe what was happening in detail. He had described the gap. She had known immediately where the problem lived, not in the language itself, in the assumptions underneath the language, in the things both sides took for granted that the other side did not. In the places where everyone in the room believed they understood each other and nobody did. She said to him, the gap between what someone says and what someone hears is where most of the damage gets done. He had been quiet on the other end of the line for a moment. Then he said, where did you learn that? She said, my grandmother. He said, she sounds like she was a smart woman. She said she was the smartest person I ever knew. She cleaned offices for 28 years. Nobody ever asked her what she noticed. A different kind of quiet on the line then, he said. I'd like to hire you. She started writing the proposal. The afternoon light moved through the library window in the slow, continuous way that light moves when you're not watching it directly. Changing angle without announcing itself. The room around her had the quality it always had, quiet and full at the same time. The hum of people doing things. The ambient sound of a building where people come to build themselves towards something. She had sat in this building years ago with a battered bag and borrowed books, and a refusal she couldn't have named at the time, but that she understood now. The refusal to accept that the inside of her own head was the one place nobody else could reach. The refusal to let what other people assumed about her determine what she actually was. She had been right about that. She wrote steadily. The proposal taking shape the way things take shape when you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Clear sentences, precise. The language of someone who has learned that clarity is not the same as simplicity, and that you can say a complex thing plainly if you care enough about being understood. The woman at the next table wrote something on her legal pad, underlined it once, read it. Then smiled to herself, the private kind. The kind that happens when something clicks into place when you're alone and it doesn't matter because the clicking is the point. She turned back to her laptop and kept going. Zara kept going too. The thermos sat beside the notebook. The three framed things sat in a row on the table in front of her. The record of a person who had been told what she was and had decided stemultus entirely and had spent years building the evidence of that decision in the only way that evidence gets built, quietly, one word at a time, in the margins of other people's spaces, in the 40 minutes between the end of a shift and the beginning of a bus ride. In the language section of a public library on the south side of a city that never fully stopped. She finished the proposal at 4:15. Read it through once. Made two small changes. One word in the third paragraph that wasn't quite right. A sentence in the conclusion that had been slightly too long. Then she saved it, closed the laptop. Sat for a moment in the particular quiet of having finished something. She looked at the three things on the table. The library card, the framed rejection, the framed page with the line through it. Ruth's voice was not something she heard anymore. Not literally, but it was present the way certain things are present after enough years. Not as sound, as orientation, as the direction you face when you're deciding something. Language is the one thing nobody can repossess. She had understood it as a child. She understood it differently now. Not just about language, about everything you build in the space between what you're given and what you refuse to be limited to. About the work that happens when nobody is watching and nobody is clapping and nobody is paying you to do it. That work, that was the thing. That was what Ruth had been pointing at all along. She gathered her things, notebook, thermos, the three framed pieces, phone in her pocket. She stood, looked at the table once, Binus, the way you look at a place you're leaving when you know you'll be back. She walked out through the language section, past the shelves, past the Mandarin grammar workbook with the blue cover, past the section where French had started for her years ago, a cracked paperback with Ruth's notes in the margins, through the main room, past the checkout desk, past the bulletin board near the exit where someone had pinned a flyer. White paper. Simple font, a green circle logo in the corner. The Ruth program. Free language learning. Open to all. Starting next month, she paused, looked at it for a moment, then walked out into the Saturday afternoon. The air was doing what Chicago air does in early spring. Cold enough to notice, but not cold enough to stop you. The street was loud in the layered way city streets are loud. Sounds stacked on sounds. The kind of noise that, after enough years, becomes the sound of home. She started walking. The bracelet was on her wrist. It was always on her wrist. The pale green beads worn smooth from years of being touched without thinking, not jade. Ruth had been apologetic about that when she handed it over, had held it out with the specific care of someone offering something they wish were more than it is. It's not jade, baby, but it's yours. Zara had thought about that moment many times since Ruth died, had turned it over the way you turn over certain things. The apology in it and the love in it, and the complicated thing underneath both, that she understood better now than she had at 19. Ruth had known her whole life what it was to have the version of things that wasn't the version you would have chosen. Not the apartment you'd choose. Not the job. Not the neighborhood or the hours or the particular exhaustion of work that does not recognize itself as skilled even when it is. Ruth had lived inside all of that, and she had handed Zara a bracelet that was not jade and said, "But it's yours, yours, yours," not borrowed, not contingent, not revocable by anyone. Zara had understood it as love at the time. She understood it now as the whole philosophy, the entire thing Ruth had been trying to give her, not just the bracelet, the idea of the bracelet, the idea that what is genuinely yours is not made less by how you came to have it. That a library card opens a door, whether it comes from a wealthy estate or a dead woman's wallet with $14 in it. That 4 languages, learned from podcasts and borrowed books, and a night class that lost its funding, count the same as 4 languages learned in a building with a name on it. That the value of a thing is not in how you came to have it. It's in what you do with it once it's yours. She kept walking. The bracelet caught the late afternoon light for a moment as she turned a corner. Small glass beads, almost jade, hers.